Alright, so I want us to talk about how to use our bottoms up method that we've talked about in class. This is one that can be very useful to you as you're trying to factor trinomials, because that leading coefficient won't always be 1. And so we're going to start with the trinomial 9t squared plus 9t plus 2. And so in the bottoms up method, again, it's important to understand what we're looking at here. We want to factor a trinomial, but our leading coefficient is not 1 now in this case. And so that's really important, because when we factor, if the leading coefficient is 1, we'll use reverse FOIL. If it's not 1, we're going to use bottoms up. Again, assuming that we are factoring trinomials. Now, in the bottoms up method, we are going to start by still looking for a greatest common factor. In this case, there still isn't one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this 10 and we're going to multiply it by that 2. That way, it's going to leave us here with a t squared plus 9t plus 20. Well, now we can factor this trinomial using the reverse FOIL method, which is good because we've talked about that, and that's hopefully fairly easy to do. And so our first term is going to be t. We're going to be looking for two numbers, again, that multiply to give 20, that are going to add to give 9. And so two numbers that will multiply to give 20 and add to give 9 will be 5 and 4. And then because this addition sign here, this last sign, is addition, it means our signs need to be the same in our binomials. And then this sign goes to the biggest number. And so it means both of the signs are going to be positive. And that's all we can do. Those two are factored. Now, because we multiplied by 10 at the beginning, the very beginning, then we also need to divide that 10 back out. And so we're going to divide both of these numbers, the 5 and the 4, by 10. And if we can simplify those fractions, we need to make sure we do that. And so that 5 over 10 does simplify to 1/2. And then the 4 over 10, 2 goes into each of those evenly. It simplifies down to 2 over 5. And then we still have fractions. And if we were to multiply these two binomials together, we're not going to get what we started with. And so these denominators are going to move from the bottom of the fraction up in front of the variable. Thus the name bottoms up. Move it from the bottom of the fraction up in front of the variable. And when we do, we should now end up with 2t plus 1 times 5t plus 2. And now that is all we can do with that. That is completely factored. That is our final answer. I do want us to try one more with the bottoms up method, just to make sure that you're clear on all the things that happen with it. We're going to start in this one with 8s squared minus 2st minus 3t squared. Now, we're still looking for a greatest common factor. We still don't have one. There's not a number that will divide evenly into 8, 2, and 3. There's not an s in every term, and there's also not a t in every term. And so we have no other way to factor that except through our bottoms up method. And so again, we're going to start by taking this 8 and we're going to multiply it by the 3. And that's going to leave us then with s squared minus 2st minus 24t squared. Now, again, we have a trinomial that now does have a leading coefficient of 1, so that's one that we can factor with reverse FOIL. And so our first term is going to be s, and then we're looking for two numbers that will multiply to give 24 and subtract to give 2. Now notice that our last term does have a t squared, and so our last term in our binomials needs to have a t in it as well, so that if we were to multiply this back together, that t times t will give us that t squared in that last term. Now, back to our numbers. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to give 24, that subtract to give 2. Again, think about all the combinations of numbers that multiply to give 24. There's 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 6 and 4. Well, 6 and 4 do subtract to give 2, and so that's going to be our combination of numbers that we choose. And then again, our signs, because this last sign is negative, that tells us that the two signs in the binomials need to be different. And that first sign, the one in front of the 2, always goes to the biggest number. And so the 6 must be negative, the 4, because it's different, must be positive. Now, one thing you have to be careful not to forget is that since we multiplied by 8, we need to divide by 8. And so we're going to divide both of these numbers by 8. And then we'll simplify those fractions again. So with the 6 over 8, 2 divides evenly in each of those. It becomes 3 over 4. And don't forget your t. And with 4 over 8, that simplifies to 1/2. Again, don't forget the t. And again, those two binomials don't multiply to give us what we started with. We need to move the denominators back up. And so we're going to move the 4 back up and the 2 back up again. Thus the name bottoms up. And so our final answer should be 4s minus 3t times 2s plus t. Now that t has a coefficient of 1. You can put that or not. It doesn't really matter. In this case, I'm going to leave it off, and so there's our final answer.